Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into something that'll make your worst Monday look like a spa day. The life of a housewife during the Great Depression. Not the Instagram aesthetic version with sepia filters and vintage aprons. I mean the real deal. No money, no safety net, no electricity half the time, and a husband who just lost his job for the third time this year. So before you settle in, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy this. A huge thank you to the viewer who suggested this topic. Your ideas genuinely shape what we cover here, and it means more than you know. The channel's also live on Spotify now, so if you'd rather listen there, the link's in the description. Now, dim those lights, switch on a fan for that soft white noise, get comfortable, and maybe appreciate that your biggest problem today was probably a software update, not whether your children will eat this week. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what it was really like to run a household when the entire economy collapsed? When your husband came home with empty pockets and emptier eyes? When keeping your kids fed meant choosing between electricity and groceries? Could you stretch a single chicken across 7 meals? Would you know how to patch clothes so many times they were more thread than fabric? Could you smile at your neighbours while hiding the fact that you hadn't eaten in 2 days so your children could? And now, congratulations, you've just woken up in 1932. The banks have failed, your savings are gone, and you're about to discover that being a housewife during the Great Depression wasn't about keeping house, it was about keeping everyone alive. You wake up to silence, not the peaceful kind, the kind that comes when your husband didn't come home last night, because he's been walking the streets looking for work that doesn't exist. The house is cold because you can't afford coal. Your children are still asleep in the bed you all share now because you had to rent out the bedrooms to strangers just to make rent. This isn't the life you planned. 6 months ago, you had a washing machine, a radio, and a roast on Sundays. Now you have $3, 2 hungry kids, and the growing suspicion that the American dream was actually just a really convincing sales pitch. Welcome to the first morning of your new life as a Depression-era housewife, where your biggest skill isn't cooking or cleaning, it's pretending everything's going to be okay. You lie there for a moment, staring at the water-stained ceiling, listening to your son's shallow breathing beside you. He's getting that cough again. The one that kept him up half the night last winter. The one you couldn't afford to treat properly, so you just rubbed his chest with Vicks and prayed. Your daughter is curled up at the foot of the bed, using her coat as a blanket because you sold the good quilts 2 months ago. You remember the day you took them to the pawn shop, how the man barely looked at them before offering you $2 for your grandmother's handiwork. You took it. You needed it. You hated yourself for needing it. The room smells like kerosene and mildew. The wallpaper is peeling in the corner where the roof leaked last spring. You never got it fixed because there was no money for repairs. And besides, what's the point of fixing wallpaper when you can barely afford bread? You swing your legs out of bed and your feet hit the cold floor. No rugs anymore. Those went to pay the electric bill and you stand there in your threadbare nightgown, trying to remember what day it is. Thursday. No, Friday. Does it even matter? Every day is the same now. Every day is just trying to make something out of nothing. You pull on your dress, the same one you wore yesterday and the day before, and button it with fingers that shake slightly from hunger. You haven't told anyone, but you've been skipping meals. Not obviously, just a bite here. Portion there, always claiming you're not hungry or you already ate. Your husband suspects, but he doesn't say anything because what could he say? That would mean acknowledging that he can't provide, that the banks failed, that his factory job disappeared overnight, that the world promised security and delivered dust. You walk into the kitchen and stare at the stove. You'll need to get it going soon, but you're rationing the coal, stretching every lump as far as it'll go. The icebox hums emptily in the corner. There's no ice, hasn't been for weeks, so it's just a box now, a wooden monument to better times. Inside, half an onion, some lard, a few carrots that are starting to soften. You'll make soup. Again. You'll add water to yesterday's broth and call it fresh. You'll serve it with bread so stale you'll need to soak it first. And you'll smile. You'll tell your children it's a feast. You'll tell them things are looking up. You'll lie so convincingly that maybe, just for a moment, they'll believe you. And that's your job now. Not cooking, not cleaning, but lying well enough to keep hope alive in a house that's slowly dying from the inside out. Let's talk about your kitchen. Once upon a time, it was stocked. Flour, sugar, canned goods lined up like little soldiers of security. Now, you've got half a bag of cornmeal, some lard that's probably older than your marriage, a few withered potatoes, and a jar of something pickled that you're legitimately afraid to open. This is what you're supposed to feed a family of 4. Every morning you open that pantry door like it's a slot machine, hoping something magical appeared overnight. It never does. You've already watered down the milk twice. You've stretched yesterday's soup into today's soup by adding more water and calling it broth. And tonight, you'll do it again, smiling at your kids like this was always the plan, like watery cabbage soup was a delicacy you'd been saving for a special occasion. The pantry used to be your pride. You remember standing in front of it after a good shopping trip, shelves lined with jars of preserves you'd canned yourself, bags of sugar and flour stacked neatly, cans of peaches and tomatoes and beans. You'd run your hand along the shelves and feel safe, provided for, secure. Now you open that door and it's like looking into a tomb. A few items scattered across the shelves, each one precious, each one calculated down to the ounce. The cornmeal has to last until next week. The laird has to stretch across 4 meals. The potatoes need to feed 5 people, so you'll cut them thin, boil them soft, mash them with water to make them look like more. You've learned to be creative. Flour and water become dumplings. Stale bread becomes bread pudding if you soak it in enough sweetened water. Not that you have sugar, but you've learned to caramelize onions to trick your children into thinking something sweet. Potatoes become hash, soup, pancakes, fritters, anything to disguise the fact that you're eating potatoes for the 4th day in a row. You save every vegetable scrap, carrot peels, onion skins, celery ends. They all go into the stock pot, simmering on the back of the stove for days, extracting every possible nutrient from things you used to throw away without thinking. But here's what nobody tells you about poverty. It's not just the lack of food, it's the mental exhaustion of constantly calculating, rationing, stretching, and planning. Every single meal is a math problem. If you use the last of the flour today, what will you do tomorrow? If you give the children the bigger portions, will you have enough energy to scrub the floors? If you splurge on an egg, does that mean no butter for a week? Your brain never stops running these equations, never stops trying to solve for X when X is survival. And the worst part? The judgment. When you go to the market, if you can afford to go, you see other women buying roasts and butter and fresh fruit, and you know they're looking at your basket with its 2 onions and a soup bone. You know they're thinking, poor thing, or worse. Well, if she managed her money better, they don't understand that there is no money to manage, that you're not poor because you're careless. You're poor because the entire economy collapsed and took your savings, your security, and your dignity with it. So you go home with your pathetic groceries. You arrange them in the pantry, trying to make them look like more than they are. You step back and stare at those nearly empty shelves. And then you close the door, take a breath, and start planning tomorrow's menu. Another miracle you'll have to pull out of thin air. Another meal conjured from nothing. Another day of pretending that this is normal, that this is fine, that everything is under control when really you're just one empty pantry away from completely falling apart. He used to come home tired, but proud. Now he comes home destroyed. You watch him walk through the door. Each evening, shoulders slumped, hands empty, and you can see it in his face. He's failing, and he knows you know. He doesn't talk much anymore. Sometimes he just sits at the kitchen table staring at nothing, and you don't know what to say. You want to comfort him, but you're drowning too. The unspoken weight between you is crushing. He can't provide and you can't fix it. And worst of all, you both know that shame is eating him alive. So you paste on a smile, serve him the smallest portion of dinner while pretending you already ate, and tell him things will get better. You don't believe it. Neither does he. But you say it anyway, because what else is there? You remember when he used to kiss you when he came home, when he'd ruffle the kids' hair and ask about their day, when he'd wash up and sit at the table and tell stories about the men at the factory, about the foreman's bad jokes, about the near miss with the machinery. He'd complain about being tired, about his back aching, about the long hours, but there was pride in those complaints. He was a working man, a provider, the head of the household. Now he's none of those things. The factory closed 8 months ago. At first he was confident. He'd find something else. Everyone said the economy would bounce back. It was just temporary. He put on his good suit every morning and walked downtown, going door to door asking for work. Any work. He'd take anything, but there was nothing. The shops didn't need clerks. The warehouses didn't need loaders. The construction sites were empty. Everywhere he went, there were 10 other men already in line, all just as desperate, all just as qualified, all just as hopeless. After 3 months, he stopped wearing the suit. It was getting worn at the elbows, and he needed to preserve it, he said, for when things turned around. Now he wears his work pants and an old shirt, both faded and patched. He still leaves the house every morning, but you're not sure where he goes anymore. Sometimes he comes home smelling like sweat and dirt, which means he probably found a day's labour somewhere, digging ditches, hauling trash, anything that pays a few coins. Other times he comes home smelling like nothing at all, which means he's been walking the streets for hours trying to look busy, trying to avoid the house where his wife and children are hungry because of him. And the worst part is you can see it killing him. Not physically, though he's thinner now, his face more angular, his hands rough and scarred, but spiritually. The man you married believed in himself. He believed in hard work, in fairness, in the American promise that if you just worked hard enough, you'd be okay. But the depression has revealed that promise for the lie it was. And now he sits at your table, staring at his calloused hands, wondering what he did wrong, wondering why he can't take care of his family, wondering if they'd be better off without him. You want to reach across the table and take his hand. You want to tell him it's not his fault, that millions of men are in the same position, that the system failed, not him. But you don't, because you're angry too. Angry that he's given up. Angry that he comes home defeated instead of fighting. Angry that you have to be the strong one, the hopeful one, the one who keeps everything together while he falls apart. So you say nothing, you clear the dishes, you blow out the candle, and you lie next to him in the dark. Both of you awake, both of you pretending to sleep, both of you drowning silently in shame and fear, and the growing certainty that this might never end. Your kids don't understand why there's no butter anymore, why breakfast is just bread. Again. Why you keep saying maybe tomorrow when they ask for candy or apples or anything that isn't grey mush. You've become a magician of meals, turning nothing into something. You make milk toast, stale bread soaked in watered-down milk. You fry potato peels and call them chips. You boil bones multiple times to extract every molecule of flavour. And when your daughter asks why you're not eating, you lie. You say you already had some, or you're not hungry, or you'll eat later. The truth? You gave her your portion. You've been doing it for weeks. And you'll keep doing it until your body starts forgetting what food feels like. Because a mother's hunger is always quieter than a child's. You've gotten good at this. At stretching meals so thin they're practically transparent, at making your children believe they're eating more than they are. You've learned every trick in the Depression-era housewife handbook, the one nobody actually writes down but every struggling mother knows by heart. You've learned that if you cut bread thin enough and toast it, it feels like more. That if you add enough water to oatmeal, it fills the bowl and looks generous, even though it's mostly liquid. That if you fry onions first, everything that comes after tastes richer, more substantial, like real food instead of the ghost of food. Breakfast is the hardest meal because your children are hungry when they wake up, and you have so little to give them. On good mornings, there's oatmeal, watery, yes, but warm and filling enough to get them to school. On bad mornings, it's just bread. Maybe with a scrape of lard if you're feeling generous, or a thin smear of jam made from fruit scraps you boiled down until they gave up their last bit of sweetness. Your son complains that the other kids at school have real lunches, sandwiches with meat, apples, sometimes even cookies. You tell him that simple food is healthier, that all those rich foods make children soft. You make poverty sound like a virtue, like you're doing them a favour by feeding them scraps. Lunch you don't have to worry about because they eat at school, or at least they're supposed to. The school started a programme for poor children, free lunches made from government surplus. You had to sign a form admitting you couldn't feed your own kids. The shame of that signature still burns, but your children eat, and that's what matters, even if it means every teacher and administrator knows your family is destitute. Dinner is your masterpiece, your daily performance of making something from nothing. You've become an expert at soup, the Depression housewife's salvation. You start with water, add whatever vegetables you can scrounge or grow, boil them until they're soft and call it soup. If you're lucky enough to have a soup bone, and you guard those like treasure, you boil it once, twice, 3 times, each time extracting a little less flavour but still something. You add potatoes to bulk it up. You add cabbage because it's cheap and filling. You add onions because they make everything taste like you tried, and then you serve it in bowls, small portions carefully ladled, and you sit with your family and watch them eat. Your daughter looks at her bowl and asks, "Is this all?" And your heart breaks, but you smile and say, "Eat slowly, savour it," as if rationing is a mindfulness practice and not a survival necessity. Your son eats quickly and asks for more. You tell him there isn't any, that he needs to learn to be satisfied with what he has. He's 8 years old, and you're teaching him that hunger is normal, that wanting more is greedy, that this is just how life is now. And then there's you. You take the smallest portion, or sometimes no portion at all. You push food around your plate to make it look like you're eating. You claim you snacked while cooking, that you're not hungry, that you'll eat later, but later never comes. You've lost weight, your dresses hang loose, your wedding ring slides around your finger, your face has taken on that gaunt, hollow look you see on every other poor woman in the neighbourhood, but your children are eating, and that's enough. It has to be enough. Because if you let yourself think about how hungry you are, about how long it's been since you felt truly full, about how your body is slowly consuming itself to keep going, you might just lie down and never get up again. So you don't think about it. You just keep cooking, keep stretching, keep pretending, and tomorrow you'll do it all again. Remember when you had ice delivered? When the iceman came twice a week and your icebox actually kept things cold? Yeah, that's over. Now your icebox is just an expensive wooden box you can't afford to use. No ice means no preservation, which means anything you manage to buy has to be eaten immediately or it rots. Milk spoils in hours. Meat? Forget it. You can't even remember the last time you bought fresh meat, so you learn to shop daily, buying only what you can cook and eat that same day. And you become an expert at judging whether something's still good by smell, texture, and prayer. If it doesn't actively crawl off the plate, it's dinner. The icebox sits in your kitchen like a monument to better times, a big wooden reminder of everything you've lost. You used to take such pride in it. $50 you and your husband saved for months to buy, back when saving was possible, back when $50 felt like an investment in your future rather than a cruel joke. The Iceman would come every Tuesday and Friday. carrying those huge blocks of ice on his leather-padded shoulder, dripping a trail of water up your front steps. He'd hoist the block into the top compartment, and you'd feel that blast of cold air, that sense of security. Your milk would stay fresh. Your butter wouldn't melt. Your leftovers wouldn't spoil. Now it's just furniture. You can't afford ice, not at 25 cents a block when you need that quarter for bread. So the icebox sits there, door slightly ajar so it doesn't develop that musty smell, completely empty except for the occasional item you're desperately trying to keep cool by sheer willpower. You've tried everything. Putting things in the cellar where it's cooler, hanging them in wet cloth to create evaporative cooling, even burying things in the backyard. But nothing really works. Food in the Depression has a shelf life measured in hours, not days. This means your entire routine has changed. You used to shop twice a week, buying enough to last, planning meals in advance. Now you shop every single day if you have money, buying only what you'll use that day. A single potato, 2 onions, a carrot. The grocer must think you're insane coming in daily for such tiny purchases, but he's stopped commenting. Half his customers are doing the same thing. Nobody has ice boxes that work anymore. Nobody can afford to buy in bulk. The entire neighborhood is living hand to mouth, day to day, meal to meal. And when you do manage to get something perishable, if someone gives you a bit of meat, if you trade for a piece of fish, if by some miracle you have cream, you have to use it immediately. You can't save it. You can't put it aside for a special occasion. It's now or never. This has changed the entire rhythm of your cooking, your planning, your life. You can't make decisions about tomorrow because there is no tomorrow in your kitchen. There's only today, only this meal, only what's in front of you right now. You've become an expert in creative preservation. You've learned to can everything you can get your hands on, boiling jars and sealing them tight so that at least some food can last through the winter. You've learned to salt, to pickle, to dry. Your windowsill is lined with herbs you're drying, your cellar with jars of tomatoes and beans you managed to grow and preserve. But fresh food? That's a luxury of the past. The icebox has become a symbol of everything the Depression took from you. Not just prosperity, but planning, security, the ability to think beyond the next 24 hours. It's a big wooden box that once held your future and now holds nothing but humid air and broken promises. Sometimes you think about selling it. It would fetch a few dollars, maybe, but you don't, because selling the icebox would feel like admitting defeat, like accepting that things will never get better. So it stays, occupying space in your kitchen, a piece of furniture that serves no purpose except to remind you every single day of the life you used to have and will probably never have again. Nothing gets thrown away, nothing. That sock with a hole, you darn it. When the darn wears through, you darn the darn. Your husband's shirt is more patch than shirt at this point. A Frankenstein's monster of fabric, scraps you've cobbled together from old curtains, dish towels, and that one dress you'll never wear again. Your children's clothes are hand-me-downs from neighbours, and you've let out every seam, lengthened every hem, and turned every collar until there's nothing left to turn. You sit by candlelight at night, needle in hand, eyes straining, fingers cramping, stitching and re-stitching the same pieces of cloth over and over, and you're grateful. Grateful you still have thread. Grateful your kids have something to wear to school, even if it's 3 sizes too big and held together by sheer willpower. Your sewing basket used to be a hobby. Now it's a survival kit. It's filled with scraps you've saved from everything. Torn sheets cut into patches, old stockings unravelled for thread, buttons snipped off garments too far gone to save. You've become a textile surgeon, taking pieces from dead clothes to keep living clothes alive. That skirt your daughter wears, the waistband is from your old apron, the hem is from a pillowcase, the patch on the knee is from your husband's worn-out work pants. It's a patchwork history of your family's decline, all stitched together and called fashion. Darning socks is your nightly ritual. After the dishes are done, after the children are asleep, after your husband has retreated into his silent brooding, you pull out your darning egg, a smooth wooden egg you slip inside the sock to create a surface for stitching, and you get to work. You've darned these same socks so many times you've lost count. The heel is more darn than original sock. The toe has been rewoven 3 times. The ankle has been patched with thread that doesn't quite match. But they still work, sort of. And new socks cost money you don't have, so you darn. Your fingers hurt. The needle pricks your skin constantly. You've got a constellation of tiny scabs on your fingertips from weeks of this. Your eyes hurt too. You're sewing by candlelight because you can't afford to run the electric lamp, and the flickering light makes it hard to see the fine work. You squint and strain and tell yourself it's just one more sock, just one more patch, just one more night. But it's never just one more. Tomorrow there will be another hole, another rip, another seam giving up the ghost. Your children are starting to look ragged. You do your best, but there's only so much mending can hide. Your son's pants are too short, his ankles stick out like pale little sticks, but you've already let down the hem as far as it'll go. Your daughter's dress is faded and patched in so many places she looks like a sad little quilt. They're being teased at school. They don't tell you this, but you know. You can see it in the way they come home with their heads down, in the way they've stopped talking about their classmates, in the way they try to hide behind their desks when the teacher calls on them. You've swallowed your pride and accepted hand-me-downs from neighbours, from church, from anyone who offers. You smile and say thank you when someone gives you a bag of their children's outgrown clothes, even though it feels like charity, even though it feels like failure. You take those clothes home, wash them as best you can with your limited soap, and alter them to fit your kids. You cut down adult clothes to make children's clothes. You turn one worn dress into 2 skirts. You unravel sweaters and reknit the yarn into smaller sweaters. You've become a magician of fabric, conjuring wardrobes out of rags. But no matter how much you mend, how much you patch, how many hours you spend hunched over by candlelight, it's never enough. The clothes keep wearing out faster than you can repair them. Your children keep growing, stretching the seams, outgrowing the patches. Your husband's work pants, if you can even call them that anymore, are held together by hope and stitches, and you know that one wrong move will split them open, and there's nothing else for him to wear. Late at night, when everyone's asleep and you're still sewing, you sometimes let yourself cry. Just for a moment. Just quiet tears that drip onto the fabric in your lap. Because this isn't how you imagined your life. You weren't supposed to be piecing together your family's dignity from scraps and patches. But you are. So you wipe your eyes, lick the thread, push it through the needle's eye, and keep sewing. Because if you stop, if you give up, if you admit that you can't keep these clothes together anymore, then everything falls apart. So you stitch, and stitch, and stitch, until your fingers bleed and the candle burns down and morning comes and you have to do it all over again. You never thought you'd be one of those women, the one standing in line at the church waiting for a handout. But here you are, clutching a basket, eyes down, pretending you don't see the neighbours who also pretend they don't see you. The line is long, the wait is cold, and when you finally reach the front, you're given a loaf of bread, some canned beans, maybe a little flour if you're lucky. You say thank you, even though it burns. You smile, even though you want to scream, because pride doesn't feed your children, so you swallow it, take your charity, and walk home with your head up just enough to fool yourself into thinking you still have dignity left. The first time you went to the relief line, you cried. You stood at the end of the block staring at the church steps where dozens of women were already waiting, and you couldn't make yourself walk forward. This was failure. This was the end of respectability. This was admitting to the entire neighbourhood that your family couldn't make it, that you needed help, that you were poor, not just struggling, but genuinely, desperately poor. You stood there for 20 minutes crying silently before you finally forced yourself to join the line, because your children were hungry, and that mattered more than your pride. Now you go every week, sometimes twice a week if things are really bad. You've learned the routine. You arrive early to avoid the longest lines. You bring your own basket because the church ran out of bags. You stand silently, not making eye contact with the other women even though you recognize most of them. Mrs. Peterson from down the street, the Slovak woman from the apartment building, the young mother with twins who always looks like she's about to collapse. You don't talk. Nobody talks. Because what's there to say? Nice weather for begging? The church ladies who distribute the food are trying to be kind, you can tell. They smile. They ask how you're doing. They say things like, God bless you, and we're all in this together. But you can see the pity in their eyes. They're not in line. They're on the other side of the table, the giving side, the side with power and plenty. They go home to full pantries and working husbands. They'll never understand what it feels like to stand in this line, to hold out your hands for charity, to say thank you for a loaf of bread that wouldn't have fed your family for one meal back when you had money. Sometimes they ask questions. How many children do you have? Is your husband working? Have you applied for relief? You answer in monosyllables. 2. No. Yes. You don't elaborate because you don't owe them your life story. You don't explain that your husband walks 20 miles a day looking for work that doesn't exist. You don't tell them that you've already pawned everything of value. You don't describe how you cry into a dish towel every night after everyone's asleep. You just take your bread and beans and go. The worst part is seeing people you used to know socially, women you used to have over for coffee, neighbours you used to exchange recipes with, the butcher's wife who used to give you the best cuts. They're all in line now too, all brought down to the same level, and there's this unspoken agreement that you pretend not to recognise each other. Because if you acknowledge each other, you acknowledge what you've become. So you stand in line together, strangers who used to be friends, all carefully looking away. You walk home with your basket feeling both grateful and humiliated. The bread will feed your family for 2 days if you stretch it. The beans might make it 3 days if you water them down into soup. The flour, if you got flour, is a small miracle that means pancakes or dumplings or something, baked that will make the house smell like normalcy for a few precious hours. This food is survival. This food is the only reason your children aren't starving, and you're grateful. But you also hate it. You hate needing it. You hate the way it makes you feel small and defeated and dependent. You hate that your children ask where the food came from and you have to lie and say a friend because you can't bear to tell them their mother is a charity case. When you get home, you unpack the basket quickly, putting the food away before anyone sees the church labels. You throw the basket in the back of the closet like evidence of a crime, and then you start cooking, turning your charity into a meal, transforming your shame into something that looks like provision. And you tell yourself it's temporary, that it won't always be like this, that someday you'll be on the other side of that table, the giving side. But deep down, you're not sure you believe it anymore. You used to have a guest room. Now you have a tenant. A stranger sleeps in your bed, well, your old bed, while you, your husband, and your 2 kids cram into one room on a lumpy mattress that sounds like it's dying every time someone rolls over. You need the rent money, desperately. So you share your home, your bathroom, your kitchen with someone you barely know. You smile when they complain about the water being cold. You nod when they mention they'd like more privacy. And you bite your tongue when they leave dishes in the sink, because losing a tenant means losing the only income keeping the roof over your head. It's humiliating, it's invasive, and it's survival. The decision to take in a boarder felt like giving up a piece of your soul. That bedroom was yours. It was where you went when you needed a moment alone, where you put guests when they visited, where you kept the nice furniture you'd saved up for back when saving was possible. It represented space, privacy. The middle-class dream of having more than you needed. Now it's an income source. Now it belongs to a stranger who pays you $12 a month and thinks that gives him the right to complain about the coffee. His name is Mr. Kowalski. He's a widower, maybe 50, who lost his job at the rail yard and is trying to get by on odd jobs. You know almost nothing else about him because you've made it a point not to get to know him. Knowing him would make this worse, so you keep things polite and distant. You say good morning when you see him in the hall. You leave his breakfast on the table and disappear before he comes down. You wash his sheets once a week and try not to think about the fact that a strange man is sleeping in your bed. But here's what nobody tells you about having a boarder. You can never relax in your own home. You're constantly aware of him. Is he in the bathroom? Can you cook dinner without bothering him? Did he eat the leftovers you were saving for tomorrow? You tiptoe through your own house, making yourself small, trying not to intrude on the space of the man who's intruding on your space. It's exhausting. Every moment at home requires calculation and consideration. Your children hate it. They have to be quiet all the time because Mr. Kowalski works nights and sleeps during the day. They can't run or play or laugh too loud. Your son got yelled at once for slamming a door, and now he moves through the house like a little ghost, terrified of making noise. Your daughter asked why a strange man lives with you now, and you didn't have a good answer. You said something about helping people and sharing space, but she's 7, not stupid. She knows it's about money. She knows you're poor. The shared bathroom is a nightmare. You've created a schedule. Mr. Kowalski gets it in the mornings, your family in the evenings, but it never quite works. Someone always needs to go when it's not their time. Someone always forgets and walks in on someone else. You've lost all sense of privacy in your own home. And the kitchen. Oh, the kitchen. That's supposed to be your domain, the one place where you're in control. But now you share it. Now you have to coordinate cooking times and ice use and cupboard space. Now you find his coffee grounds in the sink and his dirty dishes on the counter, and you have to smile and clean them up because you need his rent money more than you need your dignity. Sometimes you lie awake at night, all 4 of you crammed into one bedroom, and you listen to Mr. Kowalski moving around in what used to be your room. You hear the bed creak, your bed, the one you and your husband saved up for, the one where your children were conceived. You hear him cough, hear him shuffle to the bathroom, hear him settle back in for the night, and you feel like you're a guest in your own home, like you've been displaced, like you're renting space in a house you actually own. Your husband hates it more than anyone. He won't say it, but you can see it in his face, having another man in the house, a man who can pay rent when he can't, a man who sleeps in the master bedroom while he's crammed into a corner with his family. It's emasculating. It's a daily reminder of his failure. Sometimes you catch him staring at Mr. Kowalski with this look of pure resentment, and you worry about what might happen if things get worse, if tensions rise, if your husband's shame finally boils over into rage. But you can't afford to think about that, because without Mr. Kowalski's $12 a month, you'd lose the house. You're already 2 months behind on the mortgage. The banker sent letters. You're one payment away from eviction. So Mr. Kowalski stays, and you smile, and you share your home with a stranger, and you try not to think about how much of yourself you've had to give up just to keep a roof over your children's heads. Because pride is expensive, and you can't afford it anymore. Your mother doesn't say it out loud, but you can see it in her eyes. I told you so. She warned you about marrying him. She said he wasn't stable, wasn't reliable, wasn't enough. And now, sitting in her kitchen while she grudgingly gives you a jar of preserves, you feel like a failure. She makes little comments. Well, if you'd been more careful with money, or some women know how to make do. You smile tightly. You thank her. You take the preserves and leave before you say something you'll regret. Because asking for help from family is worse than asking strangers. Strangers don't remember. Family never forgets. You didn't want to come here. You swore to yourself you wouldn't. You'd rather stand in the relief line, rather pawn your wedding ring, rather do anything but knock on your mother's door and admit that you need help. But your children are hungry, And pride is a luxury you can't afford. So you came, and you knocked, and she let you in with that look on her face, that look that says, I knew this would happen. She's not poor, not wealthy, but comfortable. Your father died before the depression hit, but he left her the house, fully paid, and a small pension. She's careful with money, she always has been, and she's weathered the storm better than most, which means she has what you need: food, a little extra cash, maybe some of your father's old clothes that your husband could wear. But asking her for these things means giving her power over you. It means becoming, once again, the child who needs mommy to fix everything. She sits you down at her kitchen table, the same table where you ate growing up, and makes tea. Not good tea, she's rationing too, but hot water with a hint of flavour. She doesn't offer food, even though you can smell bread baking and your stomach is cramping with hunger. That's part of the punishment. She's reminding you of what she has and you don't. You wrap your hands around the cup and wait for the lecture. It comes slowly, disguised as concern. How are the children, she asks, and you say fine even though they're not, and your husband, she asks, voice dripping with judgment. You say he's looking for work, which is true but also pathetic. She nods. Of course he is. That of course carries a whole dissertation of disappointment. Of course he's still unemployed. Of course he can't provide. Of course you're here begging because he failed. Then come the suggestions. Have you thought about taking in sewing? As if you're not already mending clothes until your fingers bleed. Maybe you could sell some things? As if you haven't already pawned everything worth pawning. You know, when I was young and money was tight, I simply made do. As if the Great Depression is comparable to her temporary budget tightening 40 years ago. Each suggestion is a little barb, a reminder that in her eyes, your poverty is a personal failing, not a national crisis. You want to scream. You want to tell her that you're doing everything possible, that you're stretching every penny, every scrap of food, every ounce of energy, that you're not poor because you're careless or lazy or stupid, that the entire economy collapsed and took your security with it. But you don't say any of this because you need that jar of preserves. You need whatever help she's willing to give. So you nod. You say, "You're right, mother." You swallow your rage and your pride in equal measure. Finally, she gets up and goes to her pantry, her full pantry with rows of canned goods and flour and sugar, and selects one jar of preserves. Just one. Strawberry. She hands it to you like it's a great sacrifice. "I can spare this," she says, "but you need to be more careful. You can't keep coming here expecting me to bail you out." You take the jar. You thank her. You stand up to leave before you do something you'll regret. She walks you to the door and gives you a tight hug, the kind that's more obligation than affection. "Take care of yourself," she says, "and next time, think before you spend." You walk home with that jar of preserves and you're shaking with humiliation and anger. You're almost tempted to throw it against a wall, to watch it shatter and stain the sidewalk red. But you don't, because your children will eat the preserves on bread, and it'll be the closest thing to a treat they've had in weeks, so you carry it home and you put it in your nearly empty pantry. And you try to forget the look on your mother's face, the judgment in her voice, the way she made you feel like a child again, a disappointing, failing child who should have known better. And you swear to yourself that you'll never go back, that you'll never ask her for help again. But you know that's probably a lie, because when your children are hungry, you'll swallow any amount of shame, even your mother's. Your washing machine broke and there's no money to fix it. So now you wash clothes the old-fashioned way, by hand, in a tub, with lye soap that strips the skin off your knuckles. You scrub and wring and rinse until your back aches and your hands are raw. Laundry. Day used to take 2 hours. Now it takes all day. And the clothes don't even get that clean, they just get less dirty. But you hang them on the line anyway, and when your husband sees his shirts flapping in the wind, you hope he doesn't notice the new holes, the missing buttons, the fact that they're threadbare and fading. You hope he just sees a wife who's trying, because that's all you've got left. The washing machine was one of the first luxuries to go, not because you sold it. You couldn't get much for a broken machine, but because when it died, there was no money to repair it. The repairman came, took one look, and quoted you a price that might as well have been $1 million. So now it sits in the corner of your kitchen, a hulking metal reminder of better times, and you wash everything by hand like your grandmother did, like women have done for thousands of years. You start early in the morning because it takes hours. You haul water from the tap. You're lucky you still have running water. Some families don't, and heat it on the stove because hot water cleans better, and you need every advantage you can get. You pour the hot water into a large galvanized tub, add shavings of lye soap, and watch them dissolve into murky suds. Then you sort the clothes, whites first, then colours, then the really dirty work clothes that need extra attention. Scrubbing is brutal work. You have a washboard, a ridged metal surface that helps agitate the fabric, and you rub each piece of clothing against it, using your knuckles and the heels of your hands to work the soap through the fibres. Your hands are in hot soapy water for hours. The lye soap is harsh, meant for cleaning, not for skin. It strips away the natural oils, leaving your hands red, cracked and bleeding. By the end of laundry day, your knuckles look like they've been through a war. Sometimes they split open and bleed into the wash water, and you just keep going because stopping means not finishing, and not finishing means your family has no clean clothes. The physical toll is enormous. You're bent over the tub for hours, your back screaming in protest. Your arms ache from the repetitive motion of scrubbing, wringing, scrubbing, wringing. Wringing is especially hard. You have to twist the fabric as tight as possible to squeeze out the excess water, and wet clothes are heavy. By the time you've wrung out a load of laundry, your forearms are shaking and your shoulders burn. Then comes rinsing. You have to change the water, refill the tub with clean water, and rinse each piece individually to get the soap out. If you don't rinse thoroughly, the soap residue will make the clothes stiff and uncomfortable. So you rinse and rinse and rinse, using water you hauled and heated, water that's precious and limited, until you're reasonably sure the clothes are clean, or cleanish. Nothing ever gets truly clean anymore. There are stains you can't remove, grime that's been ground in too deep, discoloration that won't budge no matter how hard you scrub. But you do your best. Finally, you carry the heavy, wet clothes outside to hang on the line. If it's sunny, they'll dry in a few hours. If it's cloudy or humid, they might take all day, and you pray it doesn't rain because you don't have backup clothes for everyone. You pin each piece carefully, smoothing out wrinkles as best you can because you don't have the time or fuel to heat and iron later. And then you stand back and look at your work, a line of faded, worn, patched clothes flapping in the wind. Your family's entire wardrobe on display for the neighbourhood to see and judge. Laundry day leaves you exhausted. Your hands are raw and painful, your back is stiff, and you still have all your other work to do: cooking, cleaning, mending, childcare. There's no rest. But the clothes are clean, or clean enough. Your children will go to school not smelling like sweat and dirt. Your husband will have a shirt to wear when he goes, looking for work. And that's worth the pain, the exhaustion, the hours of back-breaking labour. Late at night, after everyone's asleep, you sit at the kitchen table and try to rub lanolin into your ruined hands. It doesn't help much. Your skin is too far gone, too cracked and damaged. But you do it anyway, because tomorrow you'll need these hands again. Tomorrow there will be more work, more scrubbing, more survival, and your hands, no matter how broken, have to keep going. Just like you. If you're lucky enough to have a yard, you've turned every inch of it into a garden. Tomatoes, beans, carrots, potatoes, anything that grows, you plant. You spend hours on your knees in the dirt, pulling weeds, watering with recycled dishwater, praying that this crop doesn't fail like the last one. Gardening isn't a hobby anymore. It's the difference between eating and starving. You've learned to can, to pickle, to preserve every scrap of produce before it spoils. And in the winter, when the garden is frozen and bare, you ration those jars like gold, knowing they're all that stands between your family and hunger. The garden started small, just a few tomato plants and some beans because someone at church said vegetables were easy to grow. You didn't know what you were doing. You'd never gardened before. You were a city girl, used to buying vegetables from the market, not growing them from dirt and hope. But desperate times make farmers out of housewives. So you dug up the grass in your tiny backyard, turned the soil with a borrowed spade, and planted seeds you bought with coins you'd saved from returning bottles. That first season was a disaster. Half the plants died. You didn't know about spacing, about watering schedules, about pests. The rabbits ate your lettuce. The bugs destroyed your cucumbers. You watched your garden wither and felt like you'd failed at one more thing. But you couldn't give up. So you talked to neighbours who knew about gardening, mostly older immigrants who'd grown up farming in the old country. They taught you water in the morning, not the evening. Plant marigolds to keep pests away. Save your kitchen scraps for compost. Each piece of advice was a lifeline. The second season was better. You planned more carefully. You started seeds indoors in tin cans, giving them a head start before transplanting them outside. You made raised beds from scrap wood to improve drainage. You learned which vegetables grew well in your climate and which were a waste of time. Tomatoes? Yes. Peppers? Sometimes. Melons? Forget it. You focused on calorie-dense crops, potatoes, beans, squash, things that would actually fill stomachs, not just add colour to a plate. Now, in your third season, you've become almost expert. Your garden isn't pretty, no flowers, no decorative borders, just rows and rows of practical vegetables crammed into every available space. You've planted between the house and the fence, along the side yard, even in the strip between the sidewalk and the street. Every square inch is productive. Your neighbours joke that you could feed the whole block. You don't laugh. You're trying to feed your family and it's barely working. The work is endless. Every morning before breakfast you're out there watering, checking for pests, tying up tomato vines. You use dishwater to irrigate. Every drop of water is precious, and you can't afford to waste fresh water on plants when your children need to drink. The dishwater is greyish and soapy, but the plants don't seem to mind. You also collect rainwater in barrels, salvaged from a neighbour's trash, positioning them under the downspout to catch every storm. When it doesn't rain for weeks and your barrels run dry, you carry buckets from the house, one painful trip at a time. Weeding is a full-time job. You can't afford to let weeds steal nutrients from your vegetables, so you're out there constantly, pulling them by hand, your fingers dirty and your nails broken. You've stopped caring what you look like. The neighbour ladies probably gossip about you, the woman who's always in the garden covered in dirt, hair wild, looking half feral. Let them gossip. Their opinions don't feed your children. And then comes harvest. Those first tomatoes, those first beans, they feel like miracles. You pick them carefully, almost reverently, and bring them inside like treasure. Your children's eyes light up when they see fresh vegetables. Your husband actually smiles. For a few weeks in late summer, your table has food that's fresh and abundant and yours. You eat tomato sandwiches, bean salads, roasted squash. You eat until you're almost full. It's the best time of the year, but you can't eat it all now. That would be foolish. So you preserve everything you can. You've taught yourself to can using borrowed equipment and instructions from a government pamphlet. You sterilize jars, boil vegetables, seal them tight. Your cellar slowly fills with rows of jars. Tomatoes, beans, pickles, even some fruit when you can get it cheap from a neighbour's tree. Each jar represents hours of work and a meal for winter. You label them carefully, count them obsessively. 40 jars, 50, 60. It sounds like a lot, But when you calculate how many meals that is for a family of 4 over 6 months, it's not enough. It's never enough. By winter, the garden is dead. Just frozen dirt and dead vines. You stand at the window sometimes looking out at that barren yard, mentally planning next year's garden. What worked, what didn't, what you'll plant differently. Because the garden isn't just food, it's purpose, it's control. It's the one thing in your life where effort actually produces results. You plant a seed, you nurture it, and something grows. If only everything in life worked that way. If only you could plant hope and watch it bloom. But for now, you have tomatoes, and in the depths of the depression, that's something. You remember when deliveries were normal, the milkman left, bottles on your porch, the iceman hauled blocks into your kitchen, the breadman knocked with fresh loaves. Now, silence. Those men don't come anymore, not because they don't want to, because you can't pay. You've been temporarily suspended from their routes, which is a polite way of saying you're too poor to be worth their time. So now you walk to the store, if you can afford anything, and you avoid eye contact with the delivery trucks that pass your house, pretending you never needed them in the first place. The milkman was always the first delivery of the day. You'd wake up to the gentle clink of glass bottles being set on your porch, 2 bottles of fresh milk, sometimes cream on Sundays. You didn't have to think about it. Milk just appeared, like magic, like the world was taking care of you. You'd bring the bottles in, the glass cold and beaded with condensation, and pour fresh milk over your children's oatmeal. The milkman knew your order by heart. He'd tip his cap if he saw you. Sometimes he'd leave a note about a special on butter or eggs. It was civilized. It was normal. Then one week you couldn't pay the bill. You asked him to skip a delivery, just until you got caught up. He was understanding. Everyone was struggling, he said. Lots of families were behind. But then 1 week became 2, became a month, became 3 months. And one morning you looked out and there were no bottles on your porch, just empty space where abundance used to be. You called the dairy, asked when deliveries would resume. The woman on the phone was polite but firm. When your account was settled, you owed $14. $14 might as well have been $1,400. So the milkman stopped coming. Now you see his truck roll down your street every morning, stopping at the houses on either side of yours, and you turn away from the window before he can see you watching. The iceman was next. You held on to ice delivery longer than most because you needed it for the icebox, needed some way to keep food from spoiling immediately. But ice is expensive, 25 cents for a 50-pound block, and eventually you had to choose between ice and food. Food won, so you told the iceman not to come anymore. He nodded sadly. He understood. He was losing customers every week. When he drove away that last time, his truck dripping water down the street, you felt like you'd lost something bigger than ice. You'd lost a piece of normalcy, a piece of the life you used to have. The breadman was the last to go. Fresh bread delivered 3 times a week. That was the final luxury you clung to. Because baking bread yourself requires flour and yeast and fuel for the oven. And sometimes buying the bread was actually cheaper. But eventually your tab at the bakery grew too large. The breadman was kind. He extended your credit long past what he should have. But even kindness has limits. One day he came to the door and said he couldn't deliver any more without payment. You owed $6. You promised you'd pay soon. He said he hoped so. He never came back. Now the streets are quieter. The delivery trucks still run. There are still people who can pay. Still houses where prosperity hasn't completely vanished. But they don't stop at yours. You hear them coming. Hear the bottles clinking. Hear the iceman's tongs scraping against the blocks. And you freeze whatever you're doing, waiting for them to pass. It's like being haunted by ghosts of your former life. You have to shop now for everything. This means walking to the store often with your children because you can't afford to make multiple trips. You carry a basket that used to be decorative and is now essential. You buy the smallest quantities possible, half a loaf of day-old bread, a quart of milk that you'll have to use immediately, and you walk home carrying your meagre purchases like they're precious cargo. Which they are. The worst part is seeing the delivery men around town. You run into the milkman at the grocer. He smiles uncomfortably. You smile back. Neither of you mentions the $14. Neither of you mentions that he used to start his route at your house, and now he crosses the street to avoid walking past it. You chat about the weather, about the depression, about nothing important. And then you each go your separate ways, both pretending that everything's normal, that nothing's changed, that you're not deeply ashamed of being too poor to afford milk. Sometimes you think about what you'd do if money suddenly appeared. Would you call the dairy first? Would you resume ice delivery? Would you pay off the bakery and have fresh bread again? But money doesn't suddenly appear. That's a fantasy. So you just keep walking to the store, keep carrying your own groceries, keep pretending you never needed those deliveries anyway. Because acknowledging how much you miss them, how much you miss the convenience, the predictability, the sense of being taken care of would mean acknowledging how far you've fallen. And you can't afford to think about that. You can barely afford bread. Mama, why can't we have meat anymore? Mama, why is Sally's dress nicer than mine? Mama, are we poor? You don't have good answers. You say things like, we're just being careful, or we're saving money, or it builds character. But your kids aren't stupid. They see other families who still have cars, who still eat roast on Sunday, who still buy new shoes, and they wonder why their family is different, why their mother is always tired, why their father barely speaks anymore. And you can't explain the depression to a 6-year-old without breaking their heart, or your own. The questions come constantly, casually, at the worst possible moments. You're stirring watery soup and your daughter asks why there's no chicken in it like last time. Last time was 8 months ago, but she remembers. Children remember everything, especially the good things, especially the things that are gone. Now, you tell her that chicken is expensive, that vegetables are healthier anyway, that too much meat isn't good for growing bodies. You're making up nutritional advice on the spot, turning poverty into a wellness choice. She accepts this for now, but her eyes are skeptical. Your son is older, 9, and his questions are harder. He asks why he can't have a baseball glove like the other boys, why his shoes have holes, why his friend's father has a job and his father doesn't. These questions cut deep because they're not really about baseball gloves and shoes. They're about fairness, about why some families are suffering and others aren't, about why his father comes home defeated every day. You tell him the economy's bad, that lots of people don't have jobs, that daddy's trying very hard. But 9-year-olds have a keen sense of hierarchy. They know exactly where they rank among their peers. And your son is learning that his family ranks near the bottom. The "are we poor?" question is the worst. Because the answer is yes. Obviously yes. Devastatingly yes. But you can't say that. You can't confirm your child's worst fear. Can't validate the shame they're already feeling at school when the teacher asks who needs free lunch and their hands go up. So you hedge. You say we're managing, or we're getting by, or we have everything we need. But the last one is a lie, and they know it. They don't have everything they need. They need winter coats. They need shoes that fit. They need to feel normal. Sometimes the questions are about comparison. Why does Tommy's family still have a car? Why does Sarah get new ribbons for her hair? Why do some kids bring candy to school? And you have no answer except that life isn't fair, that some families had more savings, that some fathers kept their jobs through sheer luck. You can't explain economic collapse to a child. You can't explain that your family's poverty isn't a moral failure, but a systemic catastrophe. So you deflect. You change the subject. You offer them the tiny treats you've managed to scrounge, a piece of hard candy you found in your coat pocket, a cookie you made from ingredients you can't really afford, and hope they forget the question. But they don't forget. The questions pile up. unanswered or poorly answered, forming a weight that sits on their small shoulders. Your daughter has stopped asking for things. She's learned that asking leads to disappointment, that Mama always says no or maybe later or we'll see, which all mean no. So she's just stopped wanting things out loud. She's 6 years old, and she's already learned to suppress her desires, to make herself smaller, to expect nothing. That breaks your heart more than anything else. Your son has grown angry. He doesn't ask questions anymore. He makes accusations. You don't care. You're not even trying. I hate being poor. He slams doors. He sulks. He's embarrassed by his clothes, by his home, by his family. The other boys have started calling him names, poor boy, Raggedy Andy, and he started fighting back, coming home with scraped knuckles and defiant eyes. You want to comfort him, but you don't know how, because he's right. You are poor, and there's nothing you can do about it. The hardest moments are when they ask about the future. Will it get better? When can we have a real Christmas again? Will Daddy find a job? They're asking for reassurance, for hope, for a promise that this is temporary, and you want to give them that promise. You want to say, yes, it'll get better, next year will be different, everything will be fine, but you don't know if that's true. You don't know if things will ever get better. So you say what every desperate parent says, I hope so, sweetheart. I really hope so. And then you send them out to play, or to school, or to bed, and you stand in your quiet kitchen surrounded by your poverty, and you cry. Because your children deserve better answers. They deserve better lives. They deserve a mother who can give them new shoes and full meals and the certainty that tomorrow won't be as hard as today. But you can't give them that. All you can give them is watery soup and threadbare clothes and vague reassurances that mean nothing. And you wonder if, years from now, when they look back on their childhoods, they'll remember how hard you tried. Or if they'll just remember being hungry. You owe the grocer, you owe the butcher, you owe the pharmacy. Every time you walk into a shop, you feel the weight of your tab hanging over your head like a noose. The shopkeepers are polite for now, but you see the way they glance at each other when you ask to put it on the account. You promise you'll pay next week. You've been promising that for 3 months, and you know that eventually they'll stop letting you buy anything at all. So you stretch every purchase as far as it'll go, and you pray your husband finds work before your credit runs out. The grocer knows your name. He used to smile when you came in, used to ask about your children, used to slip them a piece of penny candy when you weren't looking. Now he barely makes eye contact. He's running a business, not a charity, and your tab has grown from a few dollars to $23.47. You know the exact amount because it haunts you. $23.47. You see it written in the ledger book he keeps under the counter, your name in his cramped handwriting, numbers adding up and up and up. Every time you go in, you tell yourself you'll only get absolute necessities. Flour, lard, maybe an onion, nothing extra, nothing frivolous. But then you're standing there, looking at your tiny pile of goods on the counter, mentally calculating if it's enough to feed your family for 3 days, and you realize you need at least one more thing. A potato, a carrot, something. So you add it, hating yourself, and ask him to put it on your account. He writes it down without comment. The scratch of his pencil against paper sounds like judgment. The butcher is worse. You used to buy meat every week, a roast on Sundays, chops or sausages for the week. Now you can't afford meat at all, but you still owe him $11 from before, from when you thought your husband's unemployment was temporary, from when you still believed in paying your debts. Now you walk past the butcher shop quickly, eyes straight ahead, because if he sees you through the window, he might come out and ask about payment. Other customers see you hurrying past. They know, everyone knows who owes what in this neighborhood. Poverty isn't private. The pharmacy is the most humiliating. because you only go there in emergencies, when your son's cough gets bad enough that you're terrified of pneumonia, when your daughter's fever spikes and won't break. You ask the pharmacist for medicine on credit, and he looks at you with this mixture of pity and wariness. He wants to help, but he also has bills to pay. He usually gives you a small bottle, smaller than you need, and writes it down. $7 now. $7 for keeping your children alive. You tell yourself you'll pay him first before anyone else when money comes. But money never comes. You've developed a rotation. You shop at the grocer one week, avoid him the next. You space out your pharmacy visits as long as possible. You never go to the butcher anymore. This way, no single creditor gets too angry. No one cuts you off completely. It's a delicate balance, a choreography of shame. You're juggling debts, playing creditors against each other without them knowing, hoping you can keep all the balls in the air just a little longer. Sometimes you see other women doing the same thing. You recognize the look, the way they ask to put something on account, the way their voices drop, the way they avoid looking at the shopkeeper's face. You're all in the same sinking boat, all desperate, all ashamed. You don't talk about it, what would you say? But there's a silent solidarity, a shared understanding that this is survival, not character failure. The worst moments are when you're denied, when the grocer says, apologetically but firmly, that he can't extend any more credit until you pay something down. When the pharmacist shakes his head sadly and says he can't, he just can't. Then you have to decide, do you beg? Do you promise? Do you cry? Usually you just nod, say you understand, and leave. You walk home empty-handed, trying to figure out how to feed your children with what's already in the house, trying to calculate how long you can wait before asking a neighbour for help, trying to swallow the shame that threatens to choke you. Your husband doesn't know the full extent of it. He knows you're shopping on credit, but he doesn't know how much you owe, how many shopkeepers are losing patience, how close you are to being cut off entirely. You hide the numbers from him because he's already drowning in failure. If he knew that you owe over $40 to various shops around the neighbourhood, that you're one refused transaction away from having nowhere to buy food, it might destroy him completely. Late at night you make lists. Groceries, $23.47. Butcher, $11. Pharmacy, $7.35. Total, $41.82. $41.82 standing between you and total destitution. If you had that money, you could pay everyone off, start fresh, shop with cash like a normal person. But you don't have it. You don't have any of it. So you keep shopping on credit, keep adding to the tab, keep promising next week to people who have stopped believing you. Because the alternative is not shopping at all, and that means starvation. So you swallow your shame, sign your name in the ledger, and carry your groceries home like a thief stealing her own survival. You think you have it bad? Look next door. Mrs. Sullivan has kids, no husband, he left last year, and she's selling everything she owns just to keep the lights on. You've seen her pawning jewellery, furniture, even her wedding ring. You've heard her kids crying at night, and it reminds you that as bad as things are, they could always be worse. So you share what little you have, a cup of flour, a few potatoes. Because if you don't help each other, no one will. That's the unspoken rule of the Depression. You survive together, or you don't survive at all. Mrs. Sullivan used to be the proud one. She was always put together, always had her children looking neat, always had something baking that made the whole street smell good. Her husband worked for the railroad. Good job, steady pay, benefits. They had a car. They took vacations. She used to give you advice about housekeeping, not meanly but confidently, like someone who had things figured out. Then the railroad cut wages, then cut workers. Mr. Sullivan came home angry more and more often. Fighting started. Then one day he just left, walked out with a suitcase and never came back. Rumour is he's riding the rails out west looking for work, looking for himself, looking for anything except the family he abandoned. Now Mrs. Sullivan is raising 5 children alone with no income except what she can scrape together from selling her possessions. You've watched her life disappear piece by piece. First the car, a man came with a tow truck and hauled it away while her kids cried on the porch. Then the furniture, chairs, tables, the nice wardrobe from her bedroom. Then smaller things, dishes, lamps, picture frames. She carried them to the pawn shop one at a time, coming home with a little cash and a lot less dignity. You saw her selling her wedding ring. You were coming back from the market and nearly bumped into her outside the pawn shop. She was standing there, staring at her empty finger, tears running down her face. You pretended you hadn't seen, gave her privacy for her grief. But later that day you knocked on her door with a jar of soup, not much, just what you could spare, and she broke down crying. Not polite tears, big gasping sobs. She told you everything. The ring was all she had left from her marriage, and now even that was gone. She got $8 for it. $8 for 15 years of marriage. You held her while she cried. This woman who used to be so composed, so in control, now completely shattered. Since then, you've been trying to help. Not obviously, neither of you can afford the shame of obvious charity, but quietly. You accidentally cook too much and bring the extra over. You found a bag of hand-me-down clothes that might fit her kids. You need to borrow eggs, and somehow never get around to returning them. She does the same for you when she can. Last week she brought over bread she'd baked from flour she'd gotten from the relief line. It was dense and heavy, barely edible, but you ate it and thanked her like it was cake. Her. Children are struggling the most. The oldest, Tommy, is 14 and trying to be the man of the house. He's quit school to work whatever odd jobs he can find, shining shoes, running errands, selling newspapers. He brings home nickels and dimes and hands them to his mother like they're fortunes. The younger ones are too thin, too quiet, too old for their ages. They play in the yard but without joy, like they've forgotten how to be children. Your kids play with them sometimes, and you're grateful because at least together they can pretend things are normal. The worst nights are when you hear them through the walls, thin walls that share sounds too easily. You hear Mrs. Sullivan crying after her children are asleep. You hear the kids crying when they think their mother can't hear. You hear Tommy trying to be brave, telling his siblings everything will be okay, in a voice that's trying hard not to break. And you lie in your own bed, in your own poverty, and you're grateful. Grateful your husband hasn't left. Grateful you only have 2 kids, not 5. Grateful that your situation, as desperate as it is, isn't quite as desperate as hers. But gratitude mixed with guilt is a bitter thing. Because you can't save her. You can barely save yourself. You share your flour and potatoes. You offer kind words and the occasional jar of preserves. But it's not enough. She's drowning. And all you can do is hold out a hand from the water you're drowning in yourself, hoping somehow that 2 drowning women can keep each other's heads above water just a little longer. The neighbourhood talks about her. Some people are sympathetic, others are judgmental. Well, she must have done something to make him leave. I heard she was terrible with money. 5 children, what was she thinking? You defend her when you can, but mostly you just glare at the gossips until they have the decency to look ashamed. Because there, but for the grace of God, go you. Any of you, all of you. The depression doesn't care about your virtue or your budgeting skills. It takes everyone eventually. Some people just fall faster than others, so you keep sharing what little you have, and Mrs. Sullivan keeps surviving day by day, piece by piece, and you both pretend that things will get better, that someday you'll look back on this time and laugh, that the suffering is temporary. But on the hard nights, when you hear her crying through the walls and your own children are hungry in the next room, you wonder if survival is really enough, if just making it to tomorrow counts as winning when tomorrow looks exactly like today, and the day after that stretches into an endless grey future of hunger and loss and slow grinding poverty that wears you down to nothing. But you don't say that out loud. You just knock on her door the next morning with a cup of flour. Because that's all you have, and it's something. And in the depression, something is everything. One day you flip the switch and nothing happens. The power company finally gave up on you. Now your evenings are lit by candlelight, your mornings are cold and dark, and your icebox is truly just a box. You cook on a kerosene stove if you're lucky, or over an open fire if you're not. Your kids do homework by candlelight, squinting at the pages, and you lie awake at night wondering how long you can live like this before something breaks. The house, your marriage, or you. You knew it was coming. The letters arrived with increasing urgency. Past due, final notice, disconnection. Warning, each one felt like a countdown to disaster. You called the power company, asked for an extension, explained your situation. The woman on the phone was polite but unmoved. Pay the bill or lose service. You promised to pay. You meant it. But days turned into weeks, and the $42 you owed might as well have been $42,000. Then one Tuesday afternoon, a man in a utility uniform knocked on your door, said he was sorry, and disconnected your power. The first night without electricity is disorienting. The sun sets and your house becomes a cave. You light candles, you've been hoarding them for months, knowing this day might come, and distribute them around the house. One in the kitchen, one in the main room, one in the bedroom. The flickering light creates shadows that dance on the walls, making everything unfamiliar and slightly sinister. Your children are scared. They've never lived without electricity. To them, it's not just an inconvenience, it's the end of civilization. Your daughter asks if the lights will come back tomorrow. You say yes because you can't bear to tell her the truth. Without electricity, your routine disintegrates. You can't run the radio, so you have no news, no entertainment, no connection to the outside world. The evenings feel endless, no lights to read by, nothing to do except sit in the flickering candlelight and try to make conversation that doesn't center on how bad things are. Your husband stares at the wall. Your children fidget. You try to tell stories to fill the silence, but your voice sounds hollow, and your stories have no happy endings anymore. Cooking becomes dangerous. Your electric stove is useless, just a hulking piece of metal taking up space. You've borrowed a kerosene camping stove from a neighbour who also lost electricity last month and understands the desperation, but it's temperamental and smells terrible. Kerosene fumes fill the kitchen, making everyone's eyes water and giving you a headache that never quite goes away. You cook the simplest things possible because the stove only has one burner and you can't see properly in the candlelight. You've burned yourself twice already, reaching for a pot in the dim light and miscalculating where the flame is. The cold is worse. It's October now, heading into winter, and without electricity you have no heat. The furnace runs on electricity. So does the space heater you used to supplement. Now you have nothing, except your body heat and whatever warm clothes you can pile on. You wear your coat inside. Your children sleep in their coats. You pile every blanket you own onto the bed and huddle together for warmth at night, breathing clouds of condensation in the icy air of your own bedroom. Morning is the worst time. In summer you could wake with the sun. But now it's autumn. The mornings are dark and you wake to pitch blackness and no way to see. You stumble around lighting candles, trying not to trip over furniture, trying to get the kerosene stove going so you can heat water for washing. Your children need to get ready for school, but they can't see to brush their hair, can't find their clothes, can't do anything in the dark. You do your best. You comb their hair by feel. You button their shirts by candlelight. You send them out into the brightening morning looking dishevelled and exhausted, and you know the teachers will judge, will wonder what kind of mother sends her children to school, looking like orphans. Homework is nearly impossible. Your son has reading to do, but the candlelight is too dim and flickering to read by for long without getting a headache. Your daughter has arithmetic problems, but she can't see the numbers properly and keeps making mistakes. You try to help, but you're exhausted and the light is giving you a migraine and you snap at them. Tell them to just do their best, knowing their best isn't good enough anymore. They're falling behind in school. The teachers have noticed. You've been called in for a conference where a well-meaning teacher suggested that maybe your home environment isn't conducive to learning. You wanted to scream at her, "We don't have electricity. We're living in the dark ages because we're too poor to pay the power bill." But you didn't. You just nodded and promised to do better. The worst part is the shame. When the sun goes down, all your neighbours' houses light up, windows glowing, lives continuing normally, and your house stays dark. Everyone knows. Everyone can see that you don't have power, that you're the family that's fallen so far behind they can't even keep the lights on. You close the curtain so no one can see inside, so no one can watch you stumbling around by candlelight like you're living in the 1800s. But closing the curtains makes it even darker inside. You're trapped between shame and darkness, and neither option is bearable. You lie awake at night. You can't sleep anyway because you're cold and the house creaks differently in the dark and every sound makes you jump, and you wonder how people lived before electricity. How did they survive winters without heat? How did they cook without electric stoves? How did they see after dark without going blind from candlelight? Your grandmother would have known. She grew up without electricity, without any modern conveniences, and she survived. But you're not your grandmother. You're a modern woman living in a modern world, and the loss of electricity doesn't feel like roughing it or going back to basics. It feels like the world has abandoned you, like civilization has moved on and left you behind to shiver in the dark. Your son has a fever, a bad one. He's been coughing for days and his skin is hot to the touch. You know he needs a doctor, but doctors cost money you don't have, so you do what every desperate mother does. You pray, you try home remedies, and you hope it's nothing serious. You make him drink water. You put a cold cloth on his forehead. And you stay up all night watching him breathe, because if he gets worse, you'll have to choose between paying the rent and saving his life. And that's not a choice anyone should have to make. It started with a sniffle. Just a cold, you thought. Nothing serious. Kids get colds. You gave him warm tea with a spoonful of honey you'd been saving for exactly this purpose. You made sure he wore his warmest clothes. You kept him home from school one day to rest, but the sniffle turned into a cough. The cough turned into a deep rattling thing that shook his small body. His cheeks flushed red. His eyes got that glassy, faraway look. When you touched his forehead, he was burning up. You know this could be pneumonia. Pneumonia kills children during the Depression, kills them regularly, kills them fast. Especially children who are already weakened by poor nutrition and living in cold houses. You've heard the stories. Mrs. Chen's boy died last winter. The O'Malley girl died the winter before. Once pneumonia takes hold in a malnourished child, there's often nothing anyone can do. That knowledge sits in your stomach like ice. But calling the doctor costs $5. $5 you don't have. $5 you couldn't scrape together even if you sold everything left in your house. And even if you could somehow find $5, that's just for the visit. Medicine costs extra. The pharmacist doesn't extend credit anymore. You already owe him $7. So calling the doctor is pointless unless you can also pay for whatever treatment he prescribes. And you can't, so you don't call. Instead, you try everything else. You've heard steam helps with breathing, so you heat water on the stove and have him breathe the steam, hovering over a pot with a towel over his head. You rub his chest with Vicks Vapor Rub. The jar is nearly empty. You've been rationing it for months, but you use the last of it because what else can you do? You make him drink cup after cup of water because you've heard that fever causes dehydration. He complains. He doesn't want more water. You make him drink it anyway. At night, you don't sleep. You sit beside his bed, watching his chest rise and fall, listening to his breathing. Is it getting worse? putting your hand on his forehead every few minutes to check the temperature. Is it going down? Is it staying the same? Is it getting higher? You have no thermometer, so you're judging by touch, by instinct, by fear. When he coughs, you sit him up, rub his back, whisper soothing words you don't believe. Your daughter asks what's wrong with him. You say he'll be fine. She asks if he needs a doctor. You say no, just rest and fluids, he'll be fine. She's 7 and she's not stupid. She knows people die from being sick. She knows it because she's seen it. Her friend Emma's father died from influenza last year. At school they had a memorial, and Emma cried, and your daughter came home terrified that someone in her family would die too. Now she's watching her brother struggle to breathe, and she's scared. So are you. Your husband asks if he should call the doctor. You tell him there's no money for it. He says maybe the doctor would see the boy first and let them pay later. You remind him that you already owe the pharmacy, the grocer, the butcher. Who's going to extend more credit? He says maybe he could borrow money from someone. From who? Everyone you know is as broke as you are? His brother might have money, but his brother lives 3 states away and wouldn't send money even if you asked. Your husband's face crumples. He's helpless. You're all helpless. On the 3rd night the fever breaks. You're sitting there in the dark, no electricity, remember, just a candle stub burning down, and you touch your son's forehead and it's cooler. Not normal, but cooler. His breathing is still rough but less laboured. He opens his eyes and asks for water. You cry. Relief floods through you so intensely you nearly collapse. He's going to be okay. He made it. The fever broke on its own, and he's going to live. But the fear doesn't go away, because you know this will happen again. There will be another illness, another crisis, another moment where you have to choose between medical care and poverty, between calling the doctor and paying the rent. And next time, maybe the fever won't break. Maybe the home remedies won't work. Maybe you'll have to watch your child die, because you're too poor to save them. That knowledge sits in you like poison. Every time one of your children coughs now, you flinch. Every time they complain of a sore throat or a headache, your heart stops. Because you know that you can't protect them. Not really. Not from disease. Not without money. And you don't have money. So you just pray. Pray that they stay healthy. Pray that nothing bad happens. Pray that you never have to make the choice you know is coming. The choice between your child's life and everything else you're barely clinging to. You save bacon grease to fry with. You boil bones until they crumble. You turn old dresses into quilts, quilts into rags, and rags into, well, more rags. Nothing is wasted. Not a crumb, not a scrap, not a drop. You've become an expert at repurposing, reimagining, and stretching every resource until it's literally dust. And even then, you sweep up the dust and wonder if there's a use for it. Every household item now has 3 or 4 lives. That coffee can. First it held coffee, back when you could afford coffee. Then it became a container for nails and screws. Now it's a pot for starting seedlings because your good pots have holes in them and you can't afford new ones. That flour sack? It was packaging, then a dish towel, then patches for your son's pants, and now the remaining scraps are stuffed into a pillow because you can't afford pillow filling. Nothing gets thrown away until it's literally unusable, and even then you hesitate because maybe, somehow, there's one more use left. Bacon grease is liquid gold. On the rare occasions you have bacon, usually just a few strips bought with precious coins, you save every drop of grease in a jar by the stove. That grease fries eggs, greases pans, adds flavour to vegetables, and can be used in place of butter in desperate baking situations. You guard that jar like it's precious because it is. It represents flavour and fat and calories in a house where all 3 are scarce. When the jar runs low, you add a little water to it and swirl it around to get every last bit. Nothing wasted. Bones are boiled and reboiled. When you do get a soup bone from the butcher, usually a bone he's throwing out anyway, given to you out of pity. You boil it for soup. Then you boil it again for a second soup, weaker but still nutritious. Then sometimes you boil it a third time, even though the water barely tastes like anything at all, and call it broth for cooking rice. Finally, when the bone literally crumbles into pieces, you crush those pieces and feed them to the chickens, if you have chickens, or dig them into the garden as fertilizer. Even bones get 3 or 4 lives. Clothing goes through endless transformations. Your good dress becomes your everyday dress when it starts to fade. Your everyday dress becomes your house dress when it gets stained. Your house dress is eventually cut up for patches. The patches that are too worn to patch anymore become cleaning rags. The rags that are too threadbare to clean with become stuffing for quilts or pillows. And when even that's no longer possible, when the fabric is so degraded it's more holes than material, you unravel it and use the threads for mending other things. A single dress can last years through this process of continual downgrading and repurposing. Paper is saved and reused. Newspaper is precious. It insulates windows in winter, lines drawers, wraps fragile items, starts fires, cleans glass, and can be used as toilet paper in absolute desperation. Brown paper bags from the grocer are smoothed out, folded, and saved for wrapping presents or lunches. Even scraps of paper too small for anything else go into a box. Someday you might need to write a note or start a fire, and these scraps will matter. You save string. Every piece of string or twine that comes into your house, from packages, from bags, from anywhere, is untied, smoothed out, rolled into a ball and kept in a drawer. That string ties, packages, repairs things, hangs laundry when the clothesline breaks, laces shoes when laces snap. You have a ball of string that's made up of dozens of small pieces all knotted together, a patchwork ball of string representing years of saving every little bit. Jars are treasured. Every glass jar that comes into your house, from pickles, from preserves, from anything, is washed and saved. You need them for canning, for storing dry goods, for drinking glasses when your actual glasses break, for everything. You have a collection of mismatched jars on your shelves, and you know which size and shape is best for which purpose. The tall ones are good for beans, the wide ones are good for tomatoes, the small ones are good for jam if you ever have enough fruit to make jam. Even food scraps have multiple uses. Vegetable peels and cores go into the stock pot for soup. If you have chickens, some scraps feed them. If you have a garden, scraps go into the compost pile. Nothing edible or potentially nutritious is thrown away. You've caught yourself eyeing apple cores and wondering if there's a way to extract more value from them. You've cut mould off bread and eaten what's underneath. You've scraped the burnt parts off toast and served the rest. The line between edible and inedible is blurred significantly. This constant repurposing is exhausting. It's not just physical work, though there's plenty of that, it's mental work. Every item that comes into your house requires decision-making. Can this be saved? Should this be saved? What might I need this for later? Your brain never stops calculating potential future uses for present-day trash. You're playing a constant chess game with resources, thinking 3 or 4 moves ahead, trying to anticipate what you'll need next month and save accordingly. But here's the thing. All this saving and reusing and repurposing, it still isn't enough. Because eventually everything wears out. Eventually the fabric is too degraded, the jars break. The string becomes too short to use. Eventually you run out of things to repurpose and you're left with actual garbage and no money to buy replacements. So you start over. You beg neighbours for their trash. You pick through things people have left by the curb. You're not above scavenging if it means your family survives one more week. Poverty has made you creative, resourceful, and shameless. You'll use anything, save everything, waste nothing until the day comes, if it ever comes, when you can finally throw something away without calculating its potential second or third or fourth life. Until then, you save, you reuse, you repurpose, you survive. Sometimes he doesn't come home, not because he's left you, but because he's out there, riding the rails, looking for work in the next town, the next state, anywhere. He sends letters when he can, but they're always the same. Nothing yet. I'll keep trying, and you're left alone, holding down the house, raising the kids, pretending you're not, terrified he'll never come back. When he finally does return, thinner and quieter, you don't ask where he's been. You just feed him, hold him, and pretend the cracks aren't showing. The first time he didn't come home, you panicked. He left for work in the morning, or what passed for looking for work and simply didn't return. Evening came, then night, then morning again. No word, no note, just absence. You stayed up all night imagining terrible things. He had been hit by a car. He'd collapsed from hunger. He'd been arrested for vagrancy. He'd met another woman. He'd killed himself. Your mind cycled through every nightmare scenario, each one more terrible than the last. He came back 3 days later, exhausted and filthy, smelling like train smoke and desperation. He'd heard about possible work 2 towns over, so he'd hopped a freight train, illegal, dangerous, and gone to check it out. The work didn't exist. It was a rumour, a false lead, another dead end. But he'd gone anyway, because what else was he supposed to do? Sit at home and watch his family starve while he did nothing? So he rode the rails like a hobo, like a vagrant, like all the other desperate men crisscrossing the country, looking for jobs that didn't exist. Now it happens regularly. He hears about work somewhere, usually from another unemployed man who heard it from someone else, a game of telephone that always ends in disappointment, and he goes. He might be gone 3 days, sometimes a week. Once he was gone 10 days, and you were sure he'd died, were planning his funeral in your head, trying to figure out how you'd explain it to the children. But then he walked through the door, gaunt and defeated, and you didn't know whether to hug him or hit him. You hate when he leaves, not because you're angry, though you are sometimes, angry that he abandons you with the kids and the bills and the impossible task of making something out of nothing, but because you're terrified. The rails are dangerous. Men fall off moving trains. Men get beaten by railway security. Men get robbed by other hobos. Men disappear into the vast network of rail lines and are never heard from again. Every day he's gone, you wait for a knock on the door, a policeman with bad news, official word that your husband is dead in some rail yard 3 states away. The children ask where Daddy is. You tell them he's looking for work. They're too young to understand what that really means, that he's riding freight trains illegally, sleeping in hobo camps, eating out of soup kitchens if he's lucky and not eating at all if he's not. Your daughter asks when he'll be back. You say soon. You always say soon. But you don't know. He doesn't tell you when he's leaving half the time, and he has no way to call or telegraph because that costs money. He just goes, and you wait. When he returns, he's always worse than when he left. Thinner, quieter, more defeated. Whatever hope propelled him out the door has been crushed by another series of rejections, another week of watching other men compete for jobs that don't materialize. He washes up, cold water, because you can't afford to heat much, and sits at the table while you serve him whatever food you have. He eats mechanically, not tasting it, just filling the hollow in his stomach. Then he goes to bed and sleeps for 12 hours straight, the sleep of utter exhaustion and broken dreams. You don't talk about where he's been. There's nothing to say. You know where he's been, out there, looking, failing, surviving. Asking would just force him to relive the humiliation. So you don't ask. You just carry on. You tell him what's happened while he was gone. The children had colds but recovered. Mrs. Sullivan next door lost her house. The relief line was especially long this week. Mundane details of survival, carefully edited to avoid mentioning how scared you were, how angry, how close to falling apart. Sometimes you wonder if he'll come back one time and just keep going. If he'll decide that his family would be better off without him, that he's a burden rather than a provider, that they'd qualify for more relief if he wasn't around. You've heard stories of men who leave and never come back, not because they're cruel, but because they can't stand to watch their families suffer because of their failure. It's a twisted kind of love, abandoning your family to save them. You're terrified your husband will do the same, but so far he always comes back. Broken, defeated, but back. And you put him back together as best you can. You feed him. You mend his clothes. You tell him it's okay. It's not his fault. Something will come up. You lie to him the same way you lie to your children, manufacturing hope out of nothing because the alternative is despair, and despair is a luxury you can't afford. So you both pretend. He pretends he's still trying, that the next trip will be different. You pretend you believe him, and together you keep going day by day, lie by lie, held together by nothing but stubbornness and the faint, fading hope that someday things will get better. You used to care about your appearance. Hair done, nails clean, a little powder, maybe lipstick on special occasions. Now, you can't remember the last time you looked in a mirror and liked what you saw. Your hands are rough and red from washing. Your hair is dull from cheap soap. Your clothes are faded and ill-fitting. But vanity is a luxury you can't afford, so you stop caring. Or at least you pretend to, because deep down you miss the woman you used to be, the one who had time and money to feel pretty. There was a time when you had a routine. You'd wash your face with good soap, real soap, not the harsh lie soap you make now. You'd brush your hair 100 strokes every night until it shined. You'd file your nails, push back your cuticles, apply hand cream. You had a small collection of cosmetics, face powder, rouge, a lipstick in a pretty shade of red. Nothing extravagant, just the basics of being a put-together woman. And once a month you'd splurge on a trip to the hairdresser to have your hair waved or trimmed. Those small rituals made you feel human, feminine, valuable. Now you look in the mirror when you can stand to look and barely recognize yourself. Your face is thinner, the cheekbones too prominent, shadows under your eyes from endless nights without sleep. Your skin is dry and rough because you can't afford moisturizer and the soap you use is meant for laundry, not faces. Your hair, once your pride, is dull and brittle. You wash it with whatever you have, dish soap sometimes, and it's turned straw-like. You've started finding grey hairs. You're 31 years old and you're going grey from stress and malnutrition. Your hands are the worst. They used to be soft with neat nails and smooth skin. Now they're red and raw from constant washing in cold water with harsh soap. Your knuckles are cracked and sometimes bleeding. Your nails are broken and ragged because you can't afford a nail file, and you've been using your nails as tools, prying open cans, scraping pots, digging in the garden. You've developed calluses on your palms from scrubbing laundry and carrying heavy loads. These aren't the hands of a lady. They're the hands of a woman who's fighting for survival. Your cosmetics are long gone. You used up your face powder and couldn't afford to replace it. Same with the rouge and lipstick. You thought about trying to make your own. You've heard of women using beet juice for rouge, petroleum jelly tinted with Kool-Aid for lipstick. But that seems ridiculous when you can barely afford food. Makeup is frivolous. Beauty is frivolous. So you go barefaced, pale and washed out, looking perpetually exhausted because you are perpetually exhausted. Your clothes don't help. Everything you own is old, faded and patched. Your good dress, the one you used to wear to church, has been mended so many times it's more patched than original fabric. Your everyday house dress is stained and worn thin. You've lost weight, so everything hangs loose on you, making you look even more gaunt and ragged. You've tried belting dresses tighter, taking in seams, but there's only so much you can do. You look poor. You look like exactly what you are. A woman who's been ground down by poverty until there's barely anything left. The worst part is seeing other women who are still managing, women whose husbands still have jobs, who still have a little money, they still have their hair done, they still wear lipstick, they still look put together and feminine, and like they haven't given up. You see them at church or on the street, and you feel ashamed. Ashamed of your rough hands and your dull hair and your patched dress. You know they're looking at you, judging you, wondering why you've let yourself go. They don't understand that you haven't let yourself go. You've been fighting so hard to keep your family alive that there's nothing left for yourself. You tell yourself it doesn't matter, that appearances are superficial, that your husband doesn't care what you look like, that your children need a mother who feeds them, not one who looks pretty. All of that is true, but you still miss it. You miss feeling pretty. You miss looking in the mirror and seeing a woman you recognized, a woman who looked cared for and valuable. Now you see a stranger, a worn-out, used-up, middle-aged woman who looks 10 years older than she is. Sometimes late at night, after everyone's asleep, you look at yourself in the small, cracked mirror over the kitchen sink. You try to remember what you looked like before. You imagine having soft hands again, clean, shining hair, a dress that fits, lipstick. You imagine feeling pretty again, feeling like a woman instead of just a machine for survival. And then you turn away from the mirror because imagining hurts worse than not thinking about it at all. Because that woman, the one who was pretty, who had time for beauty routines, who felt valuable, she's gone. The depression took her along with everything else, and you don't know if you'll ever get her back. Your 10-year-old delivers papers before school. Your 12-year-old sells apples on the corner. They're not children anymore. They're contributors, and you hate it. You hate that they've lost their childhood to survival, but you also need their income. Every nickel they bring home means another meal, another day. So you smile when they hand you their earnings, and you tell them how proud you are, even as your heart shatters into pieces you'll never get back. Your son wakes up at 5 in the morning now. 5 years old, 10 years old, same thing. He's a child who should be sleeping, dreaming, growing. Instead, he's stumbling out of bed in the dark, pulling on his patched clothes, and heading out to the newspaper office to pick up his stack of papers. He delivers 40 papers every morning, running from house to house, trying to finish before school starts at 8. He makes $3 a week. $3 that used to be pocket money for a grown man is now essential family income. You take his $3, add it to whatever else you've scraped together, and use it to buy food. Your son is paying for his own meals. He's 10. Your daughter is 12 and too old for school in her own mind, though you've fought to keep her enrolled. But she's also working. After school, she goes to the corner near the market and sells apples. A grocer gives her apples on commission, bruised ones, ones he can't sell, ones that are starting to go soft. She stands on the corner with a small crate calling out, "Apples! Fresh apples! 5 cents!" in a voice that's trying to be loud and confident but just sounds young and scared. She sells maybe 8 or 10 on a good day. After giving the grocer his cut, she brings home 30 or 40 cents. 40 cents for standing on a street corner for 3 hours, being ignored by adults, being mocked by other children, slowly learning that the world is cruel and indifferent. You tell yourself it's temporary, that once things get better, once your husband finds work, the kids can stop working and be children again. But things aren't getting better. It's been 3 years, and your children have been working for 2 of those years, which means they barely remember what it was like to not work, to not contribute, to just play. Your son used to play baseball with the neighborhood kids. Now he's too tired after his morning route. Your daughter used to draw and read. Now she stands on street corners selling apples and comes home too exhausted for hobbies. The worst part is seeing how it's changed them. Your son has become serious, grown up, joyless. He counts his tips obsessively, calculating how much he made, whether it's enough, whether he did well. He's 10 years old and he's measuring his worth by his earning potential. Your daughter has developed a hard edge. She's learned to bark at potential customers, to push sales, to not take no for an answer. She's learned to ignore insults, get lost kid, nobody wants your rotten apples, and keep trying. She's 12 and she's already developing the thick skin of someone who's been beaten down by life and decided to hit back. They fight over money now. Your son accuses your daughter of not working hard enough. Your daughter accuses your son of getting the easier job. They compare earnings like rival salesmen, like their value as humans is directly tied to how many nickels they bring home. You've tried to stop this, tried to tell them that their worth isn't measured in money, that they're children and shouldn't have to work at all. But they don't believe you, because you take their money. You need their money. So your words ring hollow. Other children are cruel about it. Your son gets called paperboy like it's an insult. Your daughter has been called worse, street urchin, little beggar girl. They come home with these insults, and you try to comfort them, try to explain that there's no shame in honest work. But there is shame. You all feel it. The shame of children having to support their family. The shame of needing your children's labour to survive. Sometimes you see other children whose families are still intact financially, playing in the street, laughing, running, playing games, being children, and your kids watch them with expressions that break your heart. They watch like they're seeing something from another world, something they used to know but have forgotten, something they'll never have again. And you know that you've stolen their childhood, not intentionally, not maliciously, but stolen it nonetheless, because survival demanded it. At night, when you take their earnings and add it to the household funds, you feel like a thief, like you're stealing from your own children. Your son hands over his $3 with a mixture of pride and resignation. Your daughter counts out her coins with careful precision, and you take it all, every penny, because you have to, because without it you can't pay rent, can't buy food, can't keep the family together. So you take your children's earnings, you tell them thank you tell them you're proud, and inside you die a little bit more. Because what kind of mother needs her children to work? What kind of mother steals childhood and replaces it with labour and exhaustion and the hard lessons of adult survival? You're that kind of mother, not by choice but by necessity. And that knowledge is a weight you'll carry forever. The church gives you food, sure, but it comes with a sermon, a reminder that hard times build character, a lecture about faith and perseverance and God's plan. You sit there, hungry and humiliated, nodding along because you need that bag of flour. You take your charity with a smile and a God bless you, even though you're not sure you believe in blessings anymore, because believing in anything feels dangerous when the world keeps taking everything away. Sunday morning, you're expected to attend service if you want to keep receiving relief from the church. That's not stated explicitly, but it's understood. The families who show up to church get better treatment at the relief line. The families who don't show up start getting smaller portions, fewer extras, the clear message that their poverty is their own fault for lack of faith. So you go. You put on your best dress, threadbare, patched but clean, and you take your children to service. The church is full of contradictions. Half the congregation is as poor as you are, wearing shabby clothes and hollow-eyed expressions. The other half is still doing fine, the shop owners who haven't gone bankrupt yet, the professionals who still have jobs, the landlords collecting rent from desperate tenants. These two halves sit in the same pews, sing the same hymns, and pretend they're equal in the eyes of God, but they're not equal anywhere else. The well-off families sit near the front. The poor families cluster in the back as if poverty is contagious and distance will protect the fortunate. The sermon is always the same. Pastor Williams means well, you believe that. But his comfort comes from a place of security. He's never missed a meal. His children aren't working to support the family. His wife isn't washing clothes by hand because they can't afford to fix the washing machine. So when he talks about God's plan, about how suffering builds character, about how poverty is an opportunity for spiritual growth, his words ring hollow. Easy to talk about character building when you're not the one being built. Easy to praise poverty's spiritual benefits when you go home to a warm house and a full pantry. But you sit there and you listen. You bow your head during prayers. You sing the hymns, count your blessings, ironically, and you try to feel grateful. The church is helping you after all. The relief line, the occasional bag of food, the Christmas baskets for the poorest families. The church is doing something while the government does nothing, while the factories stay closed, while banks foreclose on homes and families disintegrate. So you should be grateful. You tell yourself you're grateful. After the service, there's always a receiving line. Pastor William stands at the door, shaking hands, offering blessings. When you reach him, he takes your hand in both of his and looks at you with practiced sympathy. "How are you managing, sister?" he asks. You say, "Fine, just fine, thank you for asking." He nods. Remember, the Lord never gives us more than we can bear. You want to scream. You want to tell him that actually, the Lord seems to be testing that theory pretty aggressively, that you're not sure how much more you can bear, that you're about one crisis away from complete collapse, but you don't. You smile. You say, "Amen, Pastor." You move along. The church ladies are worse. They run the relief program and they take their gatekeeping duties seriously. Mrs. Henderson, whose husband owns the hardware store, presides over the relief table like a queen dispensing favours to grateful peasants. She asks invasive questions. Is your husband still looking for work? Have you considered taking in laundry? Are you managing your household budget wisely, as if poverty is a personal failing, a problem of character rather than economics? She makes notations in her ledger, judging who deserves more and who deserves less based on her assessment of their worthiness. You've learned to play the game. You make yourself humble, grateful, appropriately ashamed. You thank her profusely for the smallest items. You never ask for more than you're offered. You dress your children nicely as you can, to prove you haven't completely given up, but not too nicely, or she'll think you don't really need help. It's a performance, a careful balance of desperate but dignified that you've perfected over months of practice. The bag of food you receive is never enough, but it's something. A few pounds of flour, some beans, maybe a can of condensed milk if you're lucky. You carry it home like treasure, like these few items are the difference between survival and starvation, which they are. You're grateful for them. But you also resent them, resent needing them, resent the power dynamic they create, resent the unspoken judgment that comes with every handout. Your children ask why you go to church every week when you don't seem to enjoy it. You tell them it's important to keep faith, to be part of a community, to show gratitude to God. But really you go because you need the food, because the church is one of the few remaining safety nets in a country that's let its citizens fall through every other one. Because you'll endure any sermon, any judgment, any humiliation if it means your children eat. So you sit in those back pews, you listen to lectures about character and faith. You nod along, you say amen, and you take your bag of flour and go home, grateful and resentful in equal measure, blessed and cursed by a charity that helps while reminding you exactly how low you've fallen. So tonight, as you lie in your clean bed with your full refrigerator just steps away, maybe take a moment to think about her, that housewife in 1932, standing in her cold kitchen at dawn, making watery oatmeal from almost nothing, pretending she wasn't slowly starving so her children could eat. She woke up every morning to impossible choices: feed the kids or pay the rent, keep the electricity or buy food, sell her wedding ring or lose her home. And somehow, impossibly, she kept going. She stretched meals until they were more water than food. She darned socks until they were more darn than sock. She cried silently into dish towels after everyone was asleep, because breaking down in front of her family wasn't an option. She sent her 10-year-old to deliver papers before school. She stood in relief lines and swallowed her pride along with watery soup. She sold everything she owned piece by piece, her furniture, her jewellery, her dignity, just to survive one more week. And through it all, she smiled. She told her children everything would be okay. She pretended the depression was temporary, that things would get better, that their suffering had meaning. She lied with such conviction that sometimes even she almost believed it. Because hope, even false hope, was the only thing keeping her family from complete despair. The Great Depression housewife wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. She didn't lead armies or change laws or make speeches. She just survived. She took a national catastrophe, an economic collapse that destroyed millions of families, and she faced it with a wooden spoon, a sewing needle, and an absolutely inhuman level of stubborn determination. She turned scraps into meals, rags into clothes, desperation into another day of survival. She was resourceful beyond measure, creative beyond belief, and exhausted beyond words. Her life wasn't romantic. It wasn't noble. It was brutal, grinding poverty that wore her down to nothing and then asked her to keep going anyway. She aged decades in a few years. Her hands became rough and scarred. Her body weakened from malnutrition. Her spirit cracked under the weight of constant fear and shame. But she didn't break. Or maybe she did break constantly in small, invisible ways, and she just kept gluing herself back together because there was no alternative. She's the reason many of us exist. Our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers, women who held families together through the worst economic disaster in American history. Women who sacrificed everything, including themselves, so their children would survive. Women who carried trauma they never talked about, who flinched at empty pantries for the rest of their lives, who saved every scrap and reused everything because the Depression taught them that waste was a luxury and survival was never guaranteed. So tonight, when you open your refrigerator and see food you didn't have to fight for, when you turn on your lights with electricity you can afford, when you wash your clothes in a machine instead of by hand in a tub until your knuckles bleed, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to those women. The ones who survived the unsurvivable, the ones who kept going when going seemed impossible, the ones who taught us that sometimes survival isn't pretty or dignified or fair, it's just necessary. Because history isn't just wars and presidents and great movements, it's also women standing in cold kitchens at dawn, making something from nothing, crying into dish towels and getting up the next morning to do it all again. That's history too. That's survival. That's strength. And if they could survive the Great Depression, if they could face that level of poverty and fear and still find reasons to keep going, then maybe, just maybe, we can face whatever challenges come our way. Not easily, not painlessly, but with the same stubborn refusal to give up that got them through the darkest decade of the 20th century. So sleep well tonight, in your warm bed, with your full stomach, and your running water, and your electricity, and remember that none of it is guaranteed. None of it is permanent, but all of it is precious. Because she knew that. The Depression housewife knew it better than anyone. She lost everything, survived anyway, and somehow, impossibly, miraculously, passed that survival down through generations until it reached you. Good night.